He woke up early, 6 o'clock, feeling awful. Not yet day outside the windows. The light from the lamp was a hot yellow dot on the table. He couldn't move. There was a brown stain on the pillow an inch away from his eye. He watched it till the door handle rattled. Vasant with tea. No, no second cup today. He finished the cup hurriedly, standing. It was hot, so he drank half the tea from the saucer. Vasant dawdled in the veranda, lazily viewing the world. I'm not feeling too well today. Don't bring my breakfast until I ask for it. Vasant looked at him skeptically. He waited at the door until Vasant left with the cup. Then he went to the bathroom and out through the outer door, turned the corner, slipped past his windows, and came to the front. No one around. He locked his front door from the outside and returned to his room from the bathroom. He closed and bolted the opaque windows. Now just the faint light from the ventilators, and the lamp looked even brighter. He lay down again. A late evening feeling, around him an embalming gloom, but even complete physical rest was impossible. He would have to get up sooner or later for something or the other. He joined his palms together and looked at them, mounds and lines, long thin fingers. He wished that he had believed in palmistry, believed in anything beyond himself. He tautened his fingers and let them collapse again and again. Through them he could glimpse darkly fragments of two sunsets and boatmen in Japanese conical hats. He had met so many people in Madna, but not Tamzi. But then he hadn't really wanted to meet him, just as he hadn't wanted to meet Baba Ramana. They might have proved disappointments. He had liked this Tamzi of 1962, but how ridiculous the later Tamzi had become, the government artist who created statues and rest houses for people whose idea of art could be found in the drains. Tamzi had to learn, he thought, that to be lonely was not enough. Early morning sounds, but he felt safe behind the locked door. Bicycle bells, the chatter of Vasant's children, then conversation on the veranda, scaring him by its proximity. The room in which Shankar had stayed was unlocked noisily. Someone was moving in. He waited, tensed, for more sounds. Through the wall he heard laughter, voices, the dumping of suitcases, the dragging of chairs. Someone asked Vasant for tea, then the thunder of water falling in an empty bucket. A lizard fell on the carpet with a sharp plop and scurried away towards the wastebasket. Menon would be there too in Koltanga, in his new post of district development officer, continually reminding him of what he ought to be. He felt a faint dull fever, about which he knew Multani could do nothing. He pulled the blanket over his head and breathed his own exhalations. That felt diseased and nice, and he smiled. If he went to Multani's clinic, he would meet another salesman whose tired face would again make him feel guilty. He had had enough of the mockers of his restlessness, Sati's cartoons, Shankaran Karant's dedication, and Naxalite's fanaticism. Digambar's voice outside asking Vasant where he was. He tensed again. Vasant murmured something. Sounds as they settled down on the steps of the veranda to smoke Digambar's beedies. The blanket teased his nose and beard. He curled up to his left. Beside his pillows, the napkin and nape Tehsildar had bought him in late summer for his protection from the sun. Now it lay starched with dried semen. He crumpled the cloth in his fist and laughed into his pillow. The ventilators brightened as the sun rose. He ought to get up and exercise, perhaps slowly, to devour more time. Sounds from the veranda as Digambar left. The whole day was a blank except for the party for Joshi in the evening, where he would meet Ahmed and Agarwal and the district inspector of land records, and perhaps they would all probe his aliases. Half laughing, he tried to masturbate, but he couldn't concentrate on Neera. He got up and placed his recorder next to his pillow, above the napkin. He removed Ella Fitzgerald but didn't know what to play. Tagore's infinite gentle manliness was hopelessly inappropriate for his mood. Vivaldi was too remote. For Shankar there had been his tumris and ghazals. He could conjure up exquisite nose rings and eyelashes for consolation. And Drupo too had ragtime and his fashionable jazz, but his own taste had no continuities, merely a sad mongrel hybridity. He switched on the radio and tried to catch Hindi film music, but he couldn't, too early or too late. He got up again to roll a joint. He kept his marijuana behind his books. Getting stoned meant that he wouldn't exercise, not for a few hours. The Gita reminded him of the Joker of Madna. If thou wilt not fight thy battle of life because in selfishness thou art afraid of the battle, thy resolution is in vain. Nature will compel thee, because thou art in the bondage of karma, of the forces of thine own past life. Suddenly Sati seemed disgusting, who had found this as comic as the hacking off of a friend's arms. He slipped out of the bathroom door after tea, slithered round the corners, unlocked his front door and went to ask Vasant for breakfast. Vasant was sitting in the sun, thumping the dirt off the soles of his feet. I thought you weren't having breakfast. We've cooked the tomatoes for ourselves, said Vasant, looking up at him, one hand warding off the sun. Then give me the potato, an egg and milk. He felt strange looking around at the circuit house, Vasant's wife, the stray dogs, the world that had revolved so ordinarily while he had played out his secret life. He was sucking at the hole in his tin of condensed milk when Sati asked him from the door what he was doing and whether he was practicing for sex. Oh, hello, said Agastya. I didn't hear you slink up. Have a suck. You didn't hear me because you were busy mouthing that hole and because the Maruti's is a silent 21st century car. And no thanks to your magnanimous offer of that tin. Why is the room so dark? Does sunlight scare you? Sit down somewhere, said Agastya. He felt odd, seeing another person in the room, and talked out of a kind of nervousness. The condensed milk is my only friend. I suck it thrice a day after every meal, in gratitude for its existence. The cook here has what in officialese is called standing orders to bring the tin from the fridge along with every tray. Do you want tea? Why is the milk brown? Asked Sati, examining Agastya's breakfast tray with distracting intentness. The cook probably used his shit instead of sugar, or it's the dirt from the tray. You see, he doesn't have hands like rock or a steely grip and so on. The tray dances in his hands like Uri Geller or something, and the milk slops over. Then he slops the milk back into the glass. I went over last night. Your brother said you'd gone to Hyderabad. Yes, he told me. I came back this morning, and he was leaving the same night for Bombay and Pune to argue about his cartoons. But I thought we should go out to Gorapak for the day, to relax over beer. Bhatia's in Mariagar, the industrious fool. I rang up the collectorate and Chidambaram said that you were back from Jampana. Now don't say you can't come. Of course I can, but not if you're wearing that shirt. Sati's shirt was objectionable, small green and yellow flowers on a white background like a shower curtain. Sati laughed. It's a lovely picnic shirt. Besides, this is Madna August. No one will mind. For a second something flickered in Agastya's mind, a memory that he had once argued or had wanted to argue with someone about the standards of taste in Madna. Then he said, Wait a while, I'll just get the scum off my loins. He closed the bathroom door on Sati's laugh. Sati was standing beside his books when he came out, laughing, holding aloft his polythene bag of marijuana. We must take this along. It'll ignite the beer. Et tu, Govind? Why, it's a great Indian tradition. It's one of the reasons why I like Madna. It's easier to get here than cholera. He laughed again. You are as unlikely a bureaucrat as you look. I suppose Bhatia also smokes. Half the college smoked. It was quite fashionable, and Batia's lungs have probably turned grey-green. I'm sure if we chopped up his blood vessels and smoked them, we'd get high. I owe you a Gita. Keep it, please. I have several other translations to steal from. And these Bengali tomes, what are they? He touched Pater Panchali and Gora. Oh, they're somehow very remote. One is about being revolutionary, and the other is about being poor in Bengal. But both great novels, though. Of course, Bengali, aren't they? Sati laughed. But you surprise me. I didn't know you could read Bengali. Your father, I presume. He didn't want you to end up knowing only the English of the Bombay Goans. He watched Agastya change. For someone who leads such a dissolute life, you're in reasonably good shape. I was a marathon man in my college days, Agastya laughed, as he put on his shoes. I exercise quite regularly even here. He waved his hands at the wall, seems to give the day some shape. One day when you turn sensible, you'll stop. Sati laughed and sat down on the bed beside the cassette recorder. You'll learn the complete unnecessariness of any excess physical exertion. I know you do it to feel sexy. His legs left the floor as he seesawed with laughter. But sexiness is in the mind. Ask me. And as an Indian, you should live the life of contemplation. What, does the Kama Sutra recommend push-ups? At the car, Agastya remembered, oh, there's some kind of party for Joshi this evening. I was to have attended that. He smiled at Sati. This is déjà vu. Do you remember the first lunch at your house? Will you wait a second while I make the excuses? From the circuit house, he telephoned Chidambaram and told him that he was ill. Back in the car, he told Sati, if Shrivastav comes inquiring after my health, he'll find a locked door and that cook will tell him that the patient left at 11 in the morning in a red Maruti. Then his last drive through the town and beyond, and the best one in a silent car, with the windows up, the heat and dust were at bay, and the cycles and rickshaws and fruit juice sellers looked like part of a film, distant and comfortable. Sati sat easily, paunch hiding his belt, thick lips pursed in a soundless whistle. The shitting children were as excited about the Maruti as about the new toy. It was red, and not much higher than they, and a tap could dent it. Can you poke your head out and glare at them? Asked Sati. Then they left the town behind, and Sati relaxed even more. When last I saw these shitters, said Agastya, I remembered that Gandhi line about how we lack a sense of sanitation. It sounds so simple, dig a small hole before you shit. But that's just extra physical work, said Sati. Always the easier way out. Far away in a field was a farmer behind 2 oxen plowing 3 slow spots in a landscape of brown and green. Agastya looked at him and thought, too many worlds, concentric, and he a restless center. Madna, and within it Jampana, Chipanti, Gorapak, Mariagar, like names out of magic, strong with an idiosyncratic tang, still reeking of the tribals that had once been their only inhabitants. And the megapolitan world of Delhi and Calcutta, the bewitching, because elusive, alternative, beyond which was the hinterland that countless trains tore through every day, with its dots of Ratlam and Azmaganj, and stretching out to the infinite was the time-life world, from which John Avery had come, to which Drupal's Renu had gone only to feel dislocated. Movement without purpose, an endless ebb and flow from one world to another, journeys and passages undertaken by cocoons, not for rest or solace, but for ephemerals. The flux of the sea now seemed the only pattern, within and beyond the mind, mirrored even in his encounters with the myriad faces, on some of which he had tried to impose an order by seeing them as mirror images, facets of his own self. But now that longing for repose through the mastering of chaos itself seemed vain. Perhaps it was true that he had first to banish all yearning and learn to accept the drift. Perhaps it was true that all was clouded by desire, as fire by smoke, as a mirror by dust, as an unborn babe by its covering. The car slowed down and honked timidly at few squatters on the road. He turned to Sati. I don't think you know I've been posted to Koltanga, where the company of Shankar will be far outbalanced by the presence of Menon. Sati expectedly laughed. He was an unsympathetic man. Koltanga. The town is 1/10 the size of Madna. No industries, no hotels, nothing. Just rickshaws and a video parlor. I don't think I've met Menon, but I've seen him. He's pink and shrill, isn't he? And always makes you feel vaguely unclean. Sati played a tune on the horn, and Shankar wanted to be posted to Koltanga anyway. He must have paid over 15,000 for the transfer. He smiled, but without humor. Shankar is a sick story. He wanted Koltanga because he was genuinely homesick, unlike other engineers who bribe everybody in sight to be posted to places where they can make money. Shankar paid the irrigation minister 10,000 and the minister did nothing. Shankar was powerless because he has such a record for incompetence and inefficiency that he can be suspended at any moment. If anyone is really so out of place in his job, he ought to resign. Everyone was laughing at Shankar. See, the minister took your 10,000 and farted in your face. And he's a comic figure, all that booze and music and astrology. Then he paid some more and got his transfer. It's a sick story. He should have stuck to music and kept away from everything else. I heard him years ago when he was fresh and hopeful. Now he sings only in memory of his other self, requiems for what he might have been. They reached the Gorapak in under 2 hours. They took out the food and beer. Sati said, my brother's children wanted to come. I tried to convince them of the virtues of attending school instead. Terrible if they had come. They'd have run around aimlessly and shrieked, cried if we hadn't played cricket with them. The whole day would have gone in trying to get out of the game by losing ball after ball. The urchins followed them through the trees and over the excrement to the gate of the temple, half-heartedly clutching their clothes, lightly pinching their skins for alms. They cursed the urchins and smiled. The urchins cursed and smiled back. The gate was blocked by a supine beggar who listlessly raised his hands for display. I think he'll be hurt if we don't shudder at his putrescent fingers, said Agastya. He isn't too far gone. Why doesn't he go to Baba Ramana's? He stooped a little and repeated the question to the leper, who looked at him with faint dislike. A broad, flat nose and small, fidgety eyes. The leper rubbed his forearm against the side of his belly. Probably can't speak anything other than his obscure tribal dialect, said Sati as they entered the temple, and probably dislikes Baba Ramana for making them work and be independent. Each of us has his own view of things, no? The courtyard was quite deserted. No chant from within the temple, memories of his last visit, a second of lust for Rohini, a lascivious Kumar stoning with Mohan and Bhatya in front of the incarnations of Vishnu. We should go down to the river, said Sati. There is a nice place down there. The river had waned to its early winter size. There were fewer boats and the water that moved timidly among the large grey sand islands. Sati led the descent down the uneven rock steps. Scrub on either side, a few goats placidly standing at impossible angles and showing the sharp tack of Sati's heels on stone, and soft murmurs from the village women on the beach. Sati was panting audibly. The women watched them pass across the sand and into a glade, which evidently was where the villagers had been defecating for decades. The place I know is further on, said Sati, huffing and laughing. 5 more minutes across more naked sand and they reached a small shaded pool. What an ideal place for villagers to shit, said Agastya. Why don't they? Sati laughed. Thank God for obscure legends. He put down his basket and wiped his face and neck. which exertion had crimsoned. For the villagers, this spot is holy and so cannot be defiled. He collapsed on a flat stone. The pool was about 30 feet wide. Its water was still and clean. Pale green sunlight through dateless gnarled banyans. Blocks of brown stone lay scattered around the pond like broken beads from some giant diadem. These are from the temple, said Augustia. Same kind of stone, especially that hut. The stone hut was on the other side of the pond. Its walls were also intricately carved. Must have been some kind of retreat for the kings, for sex or something. He looked around. The trees hid both the beach and the river, clean and quiet but for the whisper of leaves and the cawings of distant birds, almost menacing. Surprising, too, the lushness that existed in the most unexpected places. From the temple, this place just looks like another shit zone. Sati had recovered and was unpacking the beer. I discovered it more than 25 years ago with my father. The only place in the district I can think of that hasn't been ruined by the years. He stood 2 bottles in the water. Cools much better than a fridge. While Sati talked, Augustia hopped from stone to stone. One old and phenomenally boring sadhu lives in that hut. I hope he isn't around. He would disapprove vastly of our compounded desecration. Beer and beef and marijuana, Sati called after Augustia. You do eat beef, don't you? He paused on his toes on a stone. As long as my aunts don't get to know. He felt wonderful. My oldest aunt, my father's elder sister, says if you eat beef, you eat the flesh of your parents. He began hopping again. His voice came to Sati in snatches from a thin bearded figure gaveting on stone. My father eats beef too. He's amazing. He laughed. He eats corned beef sandwiches and wears dhotis and reads the Upanishads in Sanskrit. He irritates my aunts continually. Every time I return to Calcutta from Darjeeling for the puja holidays to eat myself sick at my aunt's houses. My father was in Delhi then. I had to swear that I hadn't had beef. I used to swear and they'd give me presents. He had reached halfway around the pond, and in school I had an Anglo-Indian classmate called Peter Martin, whose parents also stayed in Darjeeling. They called it Darj Tea State types. He used to get food from home all the time, lots of beef. He told me when we were in the 6th, I was 11th and he must have been 13. The bugger used to fail, like others used to pass. He told me. He began hopping back and forth. Hey English, he said, if you want to be an Anglo-Indian you have to eat beef, but you'll still go to hell. The fool thought that would stop us from attacking his food. The last hop brought him to the stone on which Sati sat, munching a sandwich. Why don't we smoke some of your ganja first? Asked Sati. Augustia sat down on the ground and leaned back against the stone. If you stayed here for months, you could improve your eyesight or something. It's that kind of light. It's silent and green like being underwater. He looked across the hut. If the sadhu's here, maybe we should call him. I'm sure he'd love to smoke. The one person whom we shouldn't meet is perhaps Dubey, the assistant conservator here, probably an orthodox Matilla Brahmin who'd be aghast at this desecration. Well, I'm a Brahmin too, laughed Sati. Chiptavan to my toes. That's how I first met the sadhu, about 5 years ago. I'd come here alone. I was smoking a cigarette when he emerged from somewhere and gave me hell. Saffron robe and grey long hair, huge and tough. I was tempted to ask him whether he lifted weights. I said I was innocent because I was ignorant and I couldn't have meant to be impious because I was a Brahmin. Then I showed him my janao. His laugh again jarred the stillness. I've met him quite a few times since. He's an extremely talkative man. I suppose with the villagers he has to be solemn and silent. He's some kind of self-appointed guard of this place. Sati pushed the sandwiches across to Augustia. It's a great legend. all about irresponsible lust and illegitimacy. Some obscure tribal chieftain had a bastard child. He disowned both the woman and the son. She committed suicide in this pool and the waters turned red. Lovely, isn't it? But nice irresponsible behavior because she abandoned the child on one of these stones. I asked the sadhu, which one of these stones? He was a little irritated, quite rightly, I think, and said that all the blocks were holy. Somehow the child survived in this 1,000 square yard oasis. That's the best thing about myths. In them, staying alive is such a simple matter. I wanted to ask the sadhu, where did the child shit? Equally wonderfully, the child hadn't seen the river or the sand. That was a great idea. Someone just lived in this rich greenness without having seen any dirt and dryness to compare it with. But the waters remained red, and they wouldn't turn normal until the chieftain said he was sorry. Then there was a great drought. A good third world touch, I thought, and there was no water anywhere but here. Everyone went to the king and said help. He came here and was hit on the head by lots of guilt. He renounced his kingdom to his legitimate children and came here to stay. So father and son stayed together. The father turned holy and taught the son about the wicked world, meaning himself. The waters turned clear and thousands of fish bobbed up in this pool. Thousands. Sati pointed languidly at the water. Drop some bread into it and see. No one ever fishes here, even the fish are consecrated. And it's true that the pool never dries in the peak of the worst summer. Obviously some secret underground source, and no one takes a drop of water from this place. Agastya picked up the bottles from the water. Cold and lovely, he said. He tore off some bread from his sandwich and threw it into the pool. Suddenly spasms in the water, startling after the stillness. He couldn't see the bottom for the turbulence and the darting silver fish. Then abruptly the old silence, but now false, as though merely a veil. Belches of meat and beer. Agastya said, I don't think I'm going to Koltanga. I'm going to go home and think. I need time to think. Late afternoon, Sati was flat, watching the sun gild the leaves of the banyan above them. He said after a while with sleepy sarcasm, Yes, you could stay in Calcutta and translate my cartoons for the Bengali newspapers. Agastya hated him then. He got up and went and sat by the edge of the water, watching the bed of the pool. He said, I feel confused and awful. Journey after journey, by train and jeep, just motion. Integration meetings, revenue meetings, development. First the job didn't make sense, and I thought then when it does, I'll settle down. When it did, it didn't help. I'd always be wandering, thinking chaotically of alternatives, happy images of my past, mocking. Most of the time I felt guilty. At Chipante I thought, if my mind wasn't so restless, if it cohered somehow, then I'd be working, getting water to a village, something concrete. Even at Baba Ramana's, I felt guilty, immersed in myself, while a doctor had worked a miracle. The afternoon sun seemed to yawn over the water. On its surface, in that washed light, he detected a face, the sound of movement, and suddenly Sati touched his shoulder and sat down beside him. After some moments, he laughed abruptly. Years ago, my father couldn't believe I wanted to be a cartoonist. That's no way to live. I don't think yours is any way to live either, I had said. He's made a lot of money for us, but he'd had to work for it, in what I thought was an inhuman way. Days and sometimes nights in the forest, bribing the forest officials, underpaying the tribals, beating others like him to a timber contract. He had wealth but no dignity, which he must have wanted from us. He was outraged with me. I can see why. No one takes a cartoonist seriously, the joker of Madna. He must have thought I was laughing at the way he had lived. Of course I wasn't. Because of him, money would never bother me. I was grateful, of course. Of course, I was grateful. But if I chose differently, it wasn't a fault. It was just a different choice. Sati looked at Augustia's profile. Somewhere a bird cawed. Mournfully, Sati got up and returned with the leftover sandwiches. He slowly threw bits of bread into the pool and they watched the water writhe. On the first day in Kumar's office, you asked me what I was doing in Madna. Where you've grown up, it's different, isn't it? Everyone pronounces epitome correctly and doesn't use of after compromise, and behaves as though these things matter. But Madna is home for me, August. In Bombay, I felt lost. My best years, my past, is here, bittersweet because it is gone. Whatever you choose to do, you will regret everything or regret nothing. Remember, and Sati laughed softly, you're not James Bond. You only live once. Later they hopped across, Sati laughing helplessly at each stone to the hut. It was absolutely bare, a clean earthen floor and slits in the stone for air. You're sure the Sadhu actually stays here? What did you expect in here? A video? They admired the sex on the walls. Wonderful. It must have been an amazing sight, said Sati, a dozen sculptors chipping away at stone so that huge breasts and thighs could emerge. John Avery asked me why there was so much sex in a Hindu temple. I told him there was no satisfactory explanation. John Avery, I'd forgotten the pilgrim. They began hopping back. Sati paused on one block to ask, how was Marihandi with him and his sexy wife? I felt vaguely sorry for them. She was so removed from the collectorate and the club. She's your type, isn't she? I'm sure she doesn't oil her hair either. She must have been surprised by Avery's curiosity. They began packing up the bottles and napkins. For her, the best slice of the country would be Bombay, a flat in Warden Road and afternoons at the Jehanagar Art Gallery. I don't know if she sensed when she came here that she had nothing to offer, no oddities to catch the interest of anybody. Tantric rites or the Raj or Gandhi, no past really. And Avery looked quite bewildered, didn't he? Surely not his usual expression. Sita didn't care, and those of us who are at all conscious of our history are masochists with it. I wonder if he sensed that. They began walking. But how can we blame Avery for not being interested in Sita's world, or yours? Sati laughed. You see, no one is remotely interested in your generation, August. Augustia looked back. Would be nice to come here again. You'd probably meet the Sadhu. He'd tell you all about the origins of your name. There was a chill wind on the sand beyond the trees, and the river looked dark and dying. The village women watched them pass, loose shirts and tight jeans in the twilight. They stopped a dozen times on the steps. The river was a dark mirror, the sky gray and sullen. Some scenes, said Sati between gasps, stick in the mind, don't they? He waved his arms. They are pretty, and sometimes you find them in the most unexpected places, or you think they're significant. From the Madna Bridge over the years, I saw the thermal power station grow towards the sky. Somehow that seemed momentous. The temple was deserted, a single bulb over the gate. The leper was no longer there. Near the car, Sati said abruptly, You've heard about Mohan. I wanted to laugh. He seemed so sensible. How could he have been so sentimental about lust? That woman was just a tramp, and he made me feel odd that it could happen to any one of us if it could happen to him. They reached Madna at 8. Agastya unlocked his door and stepped on a letter. Neera. Dear Ogu, to my closest friend, I'd like to say that I lost my virginity last week. How do you like my formal announcement? I haven't yet told anyone else, but I was bursting with the news all these days. And oddly, my main feeling is one of great relief. It was like shedding a burden. unlike the sense of loss a lot of girls told me they felt. My other feelings are very confused, but I am unequivocally relieved. I've taken the plunge, so to speak. And of course, it really makes no difference at all. My life is as dull as ever. I wish it could have been together with being in love, but one can't have everything. You haven't met him, but you'll dislike him a lot. He's also a journalist. Telegraph. Bespectacled, bearded, he wears kurta pajamas and has wet dreams about Marx. I can see you laughing at me. Please don't, as it is, I feel so odd. I'm going to Madras to attend Munu's wedding, but I'll be back to see you in Cal. With much love, Neera. Oh, Neera, you darling bitch, laughed Agastya as he walked around the room, letter in hand. Here for sex, I have been masturbating into napkins and stripping in front of doctors and glimpsing peons buy aphrodisiacs at bus stations, and in Calcutta, you've been humping a mouth-spewing historical inevitability with spectacles above it. Vasant's dinner would be a loathsome end to the day, so he went for his last walk through the town. He passed the house of the district judge, one tube light on in the veranda. Tomorrow and the day after would pass in goodbyes. Bhatia, the Shrivastavs, Kumar, Bajaj. Shankar and Nausati had already gone out of his lives. Lunatic hammering from the garages and annihilating the pseudo-ghazals from the music shops. The mechanic crouched over some dark mass. His arm, hammer in hand, flashed up and down against the light from his shop behind him. It looked like a very badly done brutal murder on stage. He would leave a job because he felt that he had to think. A mad act, irrational to all but himself, like running in a field at 2 a.m, like deliberately nicking his index finger with a knife. Under street light behind the juice sellers, he saw an advertisement for a film. Kanchanjunga. He had once dreamed of regression into the mild warmth of an autumn sun, but now reflux appeared to be impossible. The only movement seemed an onward, camel's back undulation. Dakshin was harshly lit and bustling, as usual. He ate idlis in a sea of sambar, listened to the Hindi disco songs from the speakers, and hoped he wouldn't meet anyone he knew. He was back at the rest house by 9:30. He looked into his room from the window like a voyeur. In the blue glow from the tube light, he saw an untidy bed, a cassette recorder on a napkin by the pillow, cassettes and an open letter on the table, a few books on the shelves. On his last day in Madna, he wrote to Drupo, "You must be dying while studying for the civil services exam. Meanwhile, I've become your American, taken a year off after college to discover himself." His aunts were outraged. One tried to relate his behavior to the original sin, the marriage of a Bengali Hindu to a Goan Catholic. Pultakaku's reaction was expectedly unconventional. "As long as the idiot doesn't join tonic," he told Agastya's father on the phone. The last false promises to the Shrivastavs and Kumar of looking them up from Koltanga, then the last train journey. Opposite Agastya sat a bald man eager to talk about his stomach. To avoid him, he opened Marcus Aurelius. "Today I got myself out of all my perplexities. Or rather, I have got the perplexities out of myself, for they were not without, but within. They lay in my own outlook." He smiled at the page and thought, "He lied, but he lied so well, this sad Roman who had also looked for happiness in living more than one life, and had failed, but with such grace." He watched the passing hinterland and looked forward to meeting his father.